Welcome and thank you for joining us for another segment of the Jane Irrigation Training Series. I'm Richard Restuccia, Vice President of Water Management Solutions. And today we're going to be talking about post-harvest irrigation system maintenance. This is what I call the pay me now or pay me later situation. And, I have often found that you can kind of group people in two different categories. Those who do the maintenance and like doing it, and others are just going to put it off. And this session today really targets both of them. If you're already doing it, that is great. You're going to learn how to do it better. And if you're not doing it, you're going to learn some reasons why you should be. Because really, I know it's at the end of the season, people are tired, but this is going to make your next season not just easier, but probably increase your yields as well. And I know we're all looking for opportunities to increase yields. So taking us through this irrigation system maintenance is Cory Broad. He's a territory sales manager and a product manager for Jane Irrigation. I've known Cory for a while now, and the one thing that I really respect and appreciate about Cory is that he really cares for his customers. If you call Cory, he is going to be there for you. He is going to work very hard to solve your problems, and he's not going to feel good until that problem's solved. If I was going to start farming in the Central Valley tomorrow, Cory would be my first call. I really mean that. Cory, a couple of years ago, was the Agriculturist of the Year for Madera County. He's a certified irrigation designer. He's a certified ag irrigation specialist. And he's also a certified crop advisor. That's a lot of talent wrapped up into one person. So Cory, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Richard. The introduction is much appreciated and the kind words. And it's important to be certified, as we know, with the Irrigation Association show coming up. There's opportunities for that. So I always promote that and promote the opportunity. And Jane Irrigation is, the most certified irrigation company, and that's something that we're proud of. So I have a few licenses, but many more in the organization do as well.
Yeah, well, and it certainly makes a difference too. So, Cory, now you're in Fresno today, and as you know, I'm in Southern California. I looked, and we're going to talk about something before we get to maintenance, but I looked at my ET Water weather forecaster this morning. There's no rain forecast in Southern California for the next 3 weeks. We haven't had a drop of rain in November. What's happening there in Fresno County?
Well, it's a similar story in the forecast outlook. Minimum 2 weeks being dry. It doesn't maybe feel like it in the morning because we are getting some of that valley fog or that Tule fog that kind of makes this home. Certainly for those of us who are from here, while it may make driving dangerous or difficult, it certainly is welcomed as a change of the seasons, as you referenced to earlier. We did have a rain event maybe 2 weeks ago, certainly not enough by any stretch. Did give us an opportunity to put some snow in the mountains, but as we know, the state has a very long ways to go in order to climb out of the current drought. So hopefully things will be a little bit better after the next couple of weeks as far as rainfall goes.
Yeah, we'll keep our fingers crossed. I was at Western Growers a couple of weeks ago, and they did a whole panel for about 2 hours on the drought and what's on the horizon. And I'll tell you, I have not heard alarm bells rung so loudly from the panel, which included water agency people from both California and Arizona. In fact, the person that was the strategist for the Arizona Central Project, and this is not all the ag water, but a good majority of the ag water, she said we underestimated the risk. And man, that sent chills down my spine when I heard that.
No, it's a very real issue for the Western states and a large populace, and then millions of irrigated acres of agriculture. So, like I said, it's something that we definitely need to keep a pulse on and proactively be searching for solutions. And I'm got to have a positive outlook, but also make sure you're water budgeting, which we'll get into in a little bit, and planning for any uncertainty that may come.
Yeah, and then Cory, if I'm doing proper post-harvest system maintenance, am I saving water when I do that?
I think there's an option or an opportunity to do so. I think it really comes down to getting the most out of every drop. I think that's why on a lot of our stuff is more crop per drop. Yeah. And I think when you're maximizing the value of that water whether it's in a residential use scenario, a landscape project, or in this garlic field that I'm standing in the picture that's on the slide. I think as a society and as members of our communities, that's the best thing that we can do, is making sure that we're following those guidelines. And I know you're super passionate about that on the landscape side and the turf side. No matter where that water is going to, if you're measuring it and managing it to its fullest extent, that's the best use of water. So of course, if you are over applying, maybe you have an opportunity to save water just right off the top.
Well said, Cory. And so, well, we're excited to see what you have today.
Yep, we'll jump right into it. And obviously, this is part two of a two-part series. And so this is actually the last slide that we left off on part one. So nobody has deja vu, but nonetheless, just to kind of recap where we were and kind of roll into the second part of this, looking at our filter station site. If we're standing at our filter station, this is a pressure gauge that you can see here at a filter system here in the valley that I was at. If you have low pressure, which is 10 pounds is what I would consider low pressure in most ag applications, and high flow rates, you probably have leaks in your field. That could be a broken pipe, a broken valve that's letting water go somewhere it shouldn't be, or even damaged emitter line and or sprinklers, depending on what's out there from an emission device standpoint. In reverse, if you have high pressure and low flow rates, you could have plugging out in the field, or maybe closed valves. So maybe it's a field that has two valves in it, and usually they're both on. Maybe one of them is closed. And so now it's limiting the flow rate to maybe just say half the field. Well, you're probably going to have twice the pressure. Not an exact correlation, but you can see how that might play out. If you're sitting in the field and taking a pressure at a riser or in a drip line, and you have low pressure, you may have plugging at your filter, and or have a low flow situation coming from your pump. So it could be a pump issue, or maybe you have other valves open. Maybe another field has water going to it that isn't supposed to because somebody didn't follow directions and turn that off. And then conversely, if you have high pressure in a field, you're taking it at a riser and you're going, wow, I have 45 pounds of pressure. I'm only supposed to have 25. Maybe you have valves closed on half the field, or you again have field plugging, and maybe you're not seeing those emission devices plugged. So again, this is just kind of a rough roadmap of kind of a checklist. If this, then maybe that, so on and so forth.
Yeah, so a couple things here, Cory. One, I just want to remind everybody we've got the Q&A open as well as the chat. If you have some comments or some questions, put them in there, and I'll do my best to get Cory to answer them during our session. And then number two, Cory, I'm thinking everybody should really have one of these pressure indicators or pressure indicator on their system. In reality, is it 100% that you see, 50%, 10%?
Yeah, I would say that most of our ag irrigation dealers here in the Central Valley do a good job of placing gauges. I think it's one of those scenarios where you can never have too many. I think one of the oversights that may happen often is we see maybe 2 to 3 of them at a filter station, and then we don't see any more. So maybe it's not even just having them, but maybe it's a density. I know for me, as somebody who's in the field quite a bit, helping growers and dealers troubleshoot scenarios and work through situations, I built my own little kit with Jane Parts, where I have a gauge that can be adapted to 5/8 strip tape, 7/8 strip tape, any size tubing, any size emitter line, go straight onto a riser, so on and so forth, so that whether I'm in a garlic field or I'm in an almond orchard or I'm at a filter station, I can not trust the gauges that are there, but can take a pressure with the same gauge over and over again. Because if a gauge is off by 2 pounds, just say, which isn't uncommon, well, at least I'm off consistently, if that makes sense, having the same gauge over and over again. And so I always recommend that farm managers, irrigators, growers should always have maybe this little kit built to where they can easily go into their field, no matter what's being grown or what the emission device is, and check that pressure themselves.
Yeah, eventually turns into a big time and money saver.
Absolutely, because again, it's when you go to the doctor, they don't take you straight into surgery. Usually they're going to say, hey, what's going on? How do you feel? I don't feel good. Okay, well, let's take your blood pressure. Let's take your pulse. That's essentially what this is doing. And then, kind of work from there.
Yeah, sounds good. Smart.
So we've talked about this filter site, but we haven't really gotten into the details of what that filter may be. And so, as many know, Jane Irrigation offers a full line of filtration products for micro irrigation, all the way from small landscape type filter applications to large scale, several thousand gallons a minute for ag applications. And obviously, one of our filter lines is our hybrid screen filters, which is the Spin Clean filter line. And it's always important with the Spin Clean filter to check your system flow rate and verify that it's spec'd for that and that the plugs are in there correctly. And so what I mean by that is you can see here, I threw up a chart which is available on our website. It's in our catalog and in our technical brochures. So I don't need you to read all of this right now, but just know that it is there. And there's a fully open spin plate all the way down to 3 holes plugged. And if you see the picture that I've placed here on the left-hand side of the slide, this is on the tailgate of my truck. There's a screen, there's 2 collars, a gland, and then that gray piece with all the holes drilled in it, that is called the spin plate. And there's a plug sitting on top of it. And then you can actually see, if you look closely on the right-hand side of it, that there's actually 1 plug already installed. And so I was working with this grower who wasn't getting, I'd say, the best performance out of his filter. And upon, some Q&A and a little bit of investigation, we found out that he needed to add another plug in order for the filter to operate properly based on the flow rate charts that you can see here that are pretty easy to identify. And installing one of those plugs is literally as easy as taking the spin plate out and gluing it in with PVC glue that you would normally use, waiting 20, 30 minutes for it to dry. This was probably in July, so it dried pretty quick here in Fresno, and just assembled the pieces back together quickly. And within a half hour, we had them up and running. And so that's probably step 1 that I always say with the Spin Clean filter is just make sure that it's sized properly from just a true filter size, but then also put those plugs in, because many growers will get a 2-inch, 3-inch, so on and so forth. And they'll say, well, I'm having this issue. Well, what's your flow rate? Let's look a little bit closer. And just by dialing that in, 99.9% of the time, you'll get this thing up and running in a jiff.
So it's really not, are the plugs installed correctly? It is, do you have the right number of plugs installed? Yeah.
Yes. And in most of the time, it's, I don't have any plugs in there. What is a plug? What do you mean? And so I usually keep a bag of them in my truck for the different sizes. And you certainly can really help out somebody's day by doing that in a quick 15-minute turnaround.
Yeah. Okay, great. And love all the locations we can find that information too.
Absolutely. So now that we've made sure that it's sized properly for our flow rate and the plugs installed, of course, it's always good to clean the screen. And before cleaning it, it's always good to inspect it, because there's no point in cleaning something that may be damaged. So check for plastisol damage, which in this photo on the left-hand side is that black ring that you can see up there. Sometimes it'll be a different color based on the mesh of the filter, orange, yellow, blue, black, so on and so forth for the different meshes. Check the screen dimensions. That's also in our tech brochure. And yeah, it's great if you can, whip out the tape measure and just kind of check it, but also visually look if the screen is, well, what I say out of round, right? It's now become an oval or oblong or even compressed under heavy pressure scenarios or water hammer situations. I've seen screens become accordions and shrink. So obviously if that's that case, then you need to make a phone call and we're going to have to replace that and get that through your certified dealer. But once you've kind of checked all that out, there's no major damage, so on and so forth. Time to clean it. Make sure you pressure wash it. Don't just hit it with the garden hose, and ensure that it's done from the outside in, just like in the picture that you can see here. Because if you clean it from the inside out, you're actually forcing the debris that's present on the screen deeper into the mesh and just making the problem worse. And this is actually done at a quarter car wash right down the street from one of my growers. and makes it really convenient because the pressure washer is there and they got the nice little stand that usually holds the wand gun. Some of my growers have built little stands like this, so it's not in the dirt and you don't have to get wet holding it, or can convince Richard to hold it while I spray it with the gun. But nonetheless, pretty simple, straightforward, just pressure wash it out, get it nice and clean. And then obviously when it's disassembled, like you saw on my tailgate, just check those other parts too, and make sure the screen collars aren't cracked. I've seen where irrigators have tried to make things fit maybe when they shouldn't have, hit it with a mallet and crack the collar, so on and so forth. Make sure those rubber glands are sealed up so no debris is passing by. Check the interior of the filter body, check that pressure gauge, just little things here and there.
Yeah, it's like a custom stand at the car wash for you. I like
exactly. That. It's I told my grower, we're gonna go down to the car wash. She's like, what? I'm like, just trust me, it makes it a lot easier.
So, Cory, if I determine that my filter is bad, do I need to buy a whole new filter assembly, or can I just buy the screen?
A la carte. That's the best part about it. So, of course, we sell complete filter units. But every piece of a spin clean filter we sell individually. So obviously most of the time it's just screens that end up getting replaced due to wear and tear. But yeah, we can sell you just the handle to hold everything together, or the nuts and bolts, and anything in between.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
So kind of jumping into the sand media side of things, which Jane offers a full line of sand media tanks, all the way from 2 tanks to as many as you can put together. We're willing to do that. But throughout the course of a season, you think about sand media, it's generally used in surface water applications where it's coming from a canal or a river. And so you're going to have various changes in water quality throughout the season, sometimes even different flow rates. And then you're going to have wearing of your media filtration elements. So usually it's crushed silica is mostly what we're using as a media base here in Central Valley. And then you can also have precipitation of chemicals and so on and so forth inside the tank. And so you need to get in there and you need to inspect your media tank levels. All you can see here in the photo on the left-hand side is just 4 bolts with the socket set, and the lid comes right off. Do it when it's off, please. Just as a word of advice, don't do it while it's running. But inspect the quality of your media. And so what I mean by that is as it wears out over time, just due to flushing and kind of all the turbulence that goes on in that tank, it loses its edge, because silica is kind of sharp in a way. It's not like beach sand, right? You go walk on the beach and it's nice and smooth. This would not be something you'd want to walk on very, very long or very regularly, just because it's very angular, which is what allows it to grab all that debris and hold it. Change your media if necessary. And so look for that edginess or edginess of your media product. And then also look for foreign inorganic material that can build up in there, which is what you're seeing on the left-hand side in the photo there in my hand. That is inorganic sediment that has come out of actually a well and was filling up inside these sand media tanks. And the problem is over the course of a season, some of it's getting flushed out, but not all of it was, and it's getting pushed deeper and deeper into the media bed itself. And now it's almost kind of completely mixed within it. And so really the only way to get it out is to remove all of the media along with it. And so this is something that I worked with a grower on, and they're actually in the process of doing that now, where they're going to flush out those tanks completely and then put brand new media in.
So a couple things here, Cory, that I wonder about is if I need some more silica, right? I think that's what you called it. Mm-hmm. Where do I buy that?
Any of your irrigation dealers carry it. I know pretty much every single one of my customers here in the Central Valley has it in, I want to say it's in 100-pound bags. And depending on the size of your tanks, will depend on the number of bags. I believe on a 48-inch tank, it's 10 to 13 bags per tank. Okay.
And then we've got a question coming in, and person's asking if they've got crushed silica, and they understand that your mileage varies depending on your water, but how long do you think you should, how much life should you get out of your sand or your crushed silica?
Well, if I had $1 for every time I got asked this question, man, Christmas would be good. But the reality is it's a great question because it does vary so much. I wish it was so much more like the automotive industry where it's like, hey, every 3,000 miles do this, right? Every 5,000, so on and so forth. I would say that as a manufacturer, of course, I'm going to recommend please change it every season. I would say that if most growers did it every 3 seasons, I'd be surprised. I'd say that most growers do it every 5 if we're lucky. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying that it's one of those things that it's a bit of a science and a bit of an art. So if you go through and you haven't done it in 3 years, go down to your dealer, buy some of the new silica in a bag, and then go open up your tank and then take the 2, right? And feel the difference. It's kind of like the soil moisture feel method, a little bit of an art, and see, if you go, wow, that is really different, then that's probably a considerable time.
How do you get the sand out of the tank?
Well, there's a drain port on the bottom, and there's a few ways to go about it. Obviously, one of the probably easiest ways is to open up that drain port on the bottom, let all of the water that's sitting in the tank drain out. And then remember that pressure washer we were talking about earlier? Yep. You can bring the car wash to you, it'd be great.
Yeah.
And basically, be very careful with the filter elements on the inside, but just pressure wash until all that stuff comes out, sweep it off your filter pad, and reinstall the plug, just like changing your oil, don't forget that. And then go ahead and fill it back up.
Yeah, okay, not too bad. And then if you do decide to take this cap off while you're under pressure, you got a problem, don't you? I mean, that could hurt you.
It certainly is a safety scenario. That's kind of why I brought it up, somewhat facetiously, but it really is a safety concern. If you see pressure on that pressure gauge, do not open up those seals. Now, I will say that depending on the elevation of your system and things like that, do expect there to be water in there, and sometimes water will still pour out. Even in this system that I did here, some water did fill out of the top, and the reason is that the way the slope of the field was and the way the filter tanks were positioned, they had water inside of them when I opened up that lid, but it wasn't under pressure, so it just splashed all over my feet, and it was no worse for the wear.
Right. But I think we all, I mean, if we put our heads together, we'd know a couple people that had a problem. So I'm glad you cautioned everybody on that.
Absolutely. Safety first. So again, talking about that, just a visual inspection of kind of what was in my hand. The left-hand side is the crushed silica, and the right-hand side is going to be that foreign debris that's inside of there. And you can see, kind of looks like mud almost on the right-hand side. It does have some clay particles in it and some sand particles, but I can tell you the one on the right is significantly softer and smoother than that stuff on the left-hand side. So again, just wanted to bring a good visual representation. As I said, it's kind of an art. The sciences, please do it every year. So now we've kind of gone through taking care of the tanks, inspecting the media, so on and so forth. So now it's kind of time to run it. And so go ahead and run that irrigation system, and make sure all the air vents are operating. Make sure your controller is working, because most of these are all set up to be auto flushing. Check the Murphy switch inside there to make sure that the PD delays and so on and so forth are operational. All your solenoids are up and working. And then go walk around, check the air vents, make sure they're not leaking, make sure they are evacuating air, that they're not plugged, because that does happen. Check all your cam lock fittings or banjo valves, all your different fertilizer chemical injection, make sure they're not leaking, cracked, going to leak, so on and so forth. And then I always say it's pretty easy. Go ahead and write down what your flow rate is and what your system operating pressure is, and write down the date. And if you're willing to put a little notepad even inside the filter box, controller box, it's great to have, right? Because I can look back and I can go, oh yeah, last time Richard ran it, it was 42 PSI, 800 gallons a minute. And then I go out there and I don't even have to know the system that well, and it's running 300 gallons a minute and 12 PSI. Now I'm making a couple of phone calls. So just kind of recording that data is always great, because we won't remember sometimes what it was supposed to be.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Cory, because I'm great at writing it down. I'm just not that good about finding where I wrote it down. So if it is right there for me to see the next time, or somebody else, that's brilliant.
take a small notepad and stick it inside that filter box because it locks. And every time you open it, it'll be right there.
Yeah, I like that.
So now we've kind of taken care of our filtration units, and now it's time to get out into the field and do some of the flushing. And so hopefully you've been doing that throughout the season. If not, there is no time like the present. I'm a firm believer in that. The picture you see on the left-hand side is actually a still frame from a video that I took. The video was too large to put in here. We were flushing a pipeline segment for a drip system that was having some major issues right in the middle of harvest for almonds, which means they're a little bit water stressed because we're drying them down and we need to get water on as soon as they're out of the field. So a very stressful situation to work through. I was probably, out there at 8 o'clock at night kind of scenario, making sure we got this thing done. And we ended up actually having to flush this segment of pipeline for 45 minutes in order to get it to clear up, because that's how much debris had built up in this large pipeline over time. And so you want to start by flushing the main line and the manifold piping segments individually, zoning down if possible. And by that, I mean turning off valves, obviously within pressure spec, to make sure that you're getting that proper flushing velocity. And then obviously duration is key. So you can do something right, but are you doing it long enough in order to clear it out? Like I said, 45 minutes was very extreme, but that was due to a lack of maintenance, as you've kind of referred to early in the presentation. So if you're taking a 660-foot pipeline and you're flushing it at 1.5 feet per second, which is kind of a minimum flushing velocity requirement, that's, the math tells me it's nearly 7.5 minutes to clear it out. That's just if you're doing it regularly. If you don't do it, now it's 45 minutes and you're stressed and worried and you have crop and so on and so forth. So anyways, just make sure you've gotten through the filter. Now you've done the piping segments, and then that'll allow us to jump into the second part of field flushing, which is the emission devices. So it could be drip tape, it could be emitter line, it could be the tubing that feeds button drippers or sprinklers. And hopefully that's been common practice as well. The correct velocity, which is correlated to higher pressure and duration, are key, as I just mentioned. Rule of thumb, 60% of your debris is in the first 40% of your line from the head end. So if you have a riser or you have lay flat, you go and you walk 40% of the distance of that lateral. That's where 60% of your debris is all captured, just due to weights and velocities. And so, like I said, 1.5 feet per second is that minimum velocity. Using our Jane Irrigation flushing calculator that's available online for free. It's very easy to use. I just plugged in a common spec here in the Valley, which is 18 millimeter emitter line, 0.5 gallon an hour at 36 inch. And if we have a 660-foot lateral run, which is not uncommon, while that hose end is open, I have to have 25 pounds of pressure at the riser. And again, doing the same math as I did before, it's about 7.5 minutes to flush that line out. You can see in the picture on the left-hand side is actually a field that I help manage, do water management services for one of my growers. And we started to see some pop-up issues on the satellite imaging. So I went out there and started flushing, and he had been flushing, but he wasn't flushing with the right velocity. And so we zoned it down, and then you can see what came out of just 2 lines of drip tubing, 330 feet long each, significant amount of debris that I compiled in my hand. Just in a very short period of time.
Yeah, Cory, for those that didn't see your flushing video, which is one of our most popular, I'm going to say 7.5 minutes or 7 minutes of watching something flush. If that's all I'm doing, that's going to feel like an eternity. Everything in my being is going to tell me, turn it off, you're wasting water. Is this like the biggest issue we see in flushing, is just not flushing long enough?
It's probably the number one thing that I see for sure. And I cover a lot of area in a lot of different types of systems. And again, it's that same thing. It's that natural inclination to go, wow, I don't want to use any more than I have to. But if you don't do it and your system DU falls off, and now, instead of putting on 4 acre feet a year, you're putting on 5. I think that 7.5 minutes probably, at 1 to 2 gallons a minute probably pencils out in your favor. But no, excellent point. And again, it's just, you could be doing everything right, but if you're just not giving it enough time to clear itself out, it may not really be making that much of a difference, because all that stuff that I told you was in the first 40% of the line. Well, maybe you just moved it down to the last 80, or excuse me, 20%, and then more stuff's just building back to where you just removed everything from. And so you just kind of moved the train down the tracks, but haven't really solved the issue.
Yeah, and that's a really important statistic you just gave about it being closer to the head, because mostly I think, oh, it's always sitting down at the end of the line where it got pushed to. So it's great to hear it's not. And that makes a lot more sense to me now, why I have to flush so long.
Yeah, everything at the end is mostly going to be that very light, small sediment that most of the time, most of the emission devices in the industry will pass anyways. And so it's deceiving, because you might open up that line and it looks really bad, and then it clears up, and then you go, wow, okay, that was, not too bad. Well, that's because a lot of stuff is certainly out of sight.
Yeah. Okay, great, thanks.
So if the emission devices are still plugged after this, you're likely going to require replacement. Doesn't mean that chemical maintenance isn't required, needed, or could potentially help you. In some instances, chemical treatment is necessary to protect the irrigation system from future contamination. So that would be kind of like a continuous scenario. Local irrigation dealers should be able to have specialists on staff to help you select the correct treatment for your system, your field, crop, issue, so on and so forth. I would say that it always starts with a water sample. If they don't ask for a water sample, that's probably an indicator, because if you don't want to invest in getting the water sample as a grower, it's going to be really hard to expect that professional to select the right products to interact with your chemistry. And as you can see on the left-hand side, this is a field that I was troubleshooting also with a competitor's product. And there was no way that device was going to continue to work even after flushing the field. So that's a scenario where we actually went through and we shocked it and got most of it working, but still some device replacement was required. And so common types of products used, and I'm not advocating any specific style of product, but just, again, things that I see here and interact with: calcium hypochlorite, copper, sulfuric acid, chlorine, hydrogen peroxides are becoming more and more common as an oxidizer. I will say that all recommendations should come from a certified professional, and all safety label precautions must be followed. Please invest in these people. We talked about certifications earlier. There are people who are really good at this, and will make sure that they're going to take care of your system. They're going to do it right. They're going to do it safely, and they're going to protect your crop. And all our irrigation systems will likely need to be flushed after treatment occurs to remove those large-scale debris. I do see a common misconception where just say an acid is used, where we think, well, it's just going to eat it up. It's just going to break it all down and it's going to disappear, right? It just dissolves. I can tell you that we can't probably keep the pH low enough, long enough for that to happen, especially with sediment. And so now you've kind of released a lot of that debris. Now we've got to go through and we got to get it out. So that's where those other principles that I talked about earlier, with the right velocities and the right durations, are going to allow you to evacuate all that material that's now been broken down and is more, quote, flushable.
Yeah, so am I going to need some type of chemical maintenance on almost every system every year?
It's so hard to say just because there are so many varying water qualities. I would say that as these systems have gotten more and more complex, the values of our crops have become more and more important, and the cost of water has increased. There's certainly more investment in this space. And so people are looking at it and going, well, if I spend, and I'll pick a number, but $25 an acre, $50 an acre per year right now, what does that pencil out? Richard and I sit down and we say, well, if we have one of these issues where we have to flush a line for 45 minutes and we have to replace 10% of our emission devices, what does that pencil out to? And I think pretty quickly people are recognizing that, the value of that water and the labor, so on and so forth, certainly outweighs any cost of getting some type of protection for your system. No different than having a water softener for your house.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. And so now we've kind of gone through all this stuff and we've kind of, quote, put the system to bed. But of course, we can never stop thinking about next year. And so planning for next season needs to include water budgeting, no matter what crop you're growing. So you should consider tracking how much water you've applied this past season, how much water your crop actually used, and then how efficiently you applied that water, which would obviously be super important. We talked about if you need 4 acre feet and you applied 5, well, why? Because we certainly want to make those numbers a little bit tighter there. Obviously, for me, as somebody who's a water management professional, somebody who helps growers with our water management services, and certainly very passionate about technology, Jane Logic is a great tool for all of this. Flow meter monitoring, pressure monitoring, filter health, actual crop water use with satellite imaging, actual water applied, soil moisture monitoring. It really allows us to get a complete picture of your field, your crop, and your irrigation system, and making sure that all those are in balance with each other and allowing you to maximize that water like we talked about very early on in the presentation.
Yeah, you had mentioned about, needing to have some tools to manage your water. Boy, look at all those.
Yeah, I mean, the pressure gauge is just one, but thinking about adding in Jane Logic, telemetry along with our satellite imaging packaging and so on and so forth, the tools really at the palm of your hand, it's overused, are endless, and the amount of insights that you can gain from this have been extremely powerful for my customers.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, especially if I've got a few $1 million wrapped up in my fields, I want to know this information.
Absolutely. And so kind of looking back now in incomplete from really part 1 and now some of part 2, we just talked about that water budget. We have an irrigation start and stop, which kind of plays into your water budget, right? When am I going to start irrigating and when am I going to stop? Flushing protocol. So that'll play into your irrigation season. How often is it necessary? It's kind of like the changing of the media question. I have some growers that can flush once a month. I have other growers that have to flush every other week. It just depends based on your water quality and your system design. Chemical maintenance kind of plays into this also. Something I need to do continuously, or should I, maybe just do 1 or 2 shocks a year? Materials, please have materials on hand. Your dealer should have them, but should not rely on them to be your warehouse. You should probably have some couplers, some swivel tees, your correct hose or emitter line for your field in your barn, in your shop, somewhere around that's quickly accessible. So these small problems don't hinder maybe a large scale irrigation event that needs to happen. And then last presentation, we talked about DU testing. Doesn't need to be a full global DU. I wish everybody would do it. I wish everybody could do it. But even some form of a rapid or modified DU test, like we talked about in the last presentation, I think is totally acceptable and is certainly a great benchmark for tracking your system performance. And then this is a quote from a book that I read a couple months ago, and it's something that I take near and dear because I think that in farming, things happen quickly, and there's a lot of issues that come at us every day. But when the pressure is on, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your highest level of preparation. And so I think if you go through this plan that I've laid out here, and you have a lot of these things figured out ahead of time, it's going to make any inconvenience much more insignificant.
Wow, I love that quote, Cory, and I love this presentation. I know that it's going to be in our training area at Jane, so I can look at it every year or a couple times during the year if I need to. It's really, I think it's really important, of course, to do the maintenance, and then more importantly, just to have this readily accessible is really great. So thank you very much for doing this.
No, thank you for the time, and thank you to the audience. I know we're headed towards the holidays now, or at least the start of the holiday season. And maybe, quite a few people are going to take the entire week off next week. And so that makes this Friday that much busier. But I certainly want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving and appreciate the time. And again, really looking forward to making sure our systems are ready for next year. So if anything comes up in the interim, maybe outside of Thanksgiving Day, give me a ring and we'll certainly get together and make sure we're ready to go.
Yeah, and happy Thanksgiving to you too, Cory. And that's really generous. Your emails here, your phone number. I'm going to encourage everybody who's watching, please use it. Cory will be very helpful to you, and you'll be better for called Cory. So Thank you again, Cory. And just want to remind everybody too, all of Cory's other webinars, plus a lot more, are on the Janes training page at janesusa.com/training. You can find them all there and they're free. We also are anywhere you can find your favorite podcast. You'll find us there as well. Just a reminder too that many of our segments are approved for CEU credits with the Irrigation Association, and they are free. This might be the only place where you can find credits for free. And we're getting down to the end of the year, as Cory mentioned. It's a great place to get those. And we even have a link there that shows you how to get your credit once you've watched our videos. So we're trying to make it as streamlined as possible. Cory, thank you. To all our viewers, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you guys back here in December. All right, thanks.